Welcome back. If you're looking to really get your head around a complex topic, get a solid understanding without feeling totally overwhelmed, that's exactly what we aim for in these deep dives.
Hmm.
And today, we're digging into something really significant: the long-term effects of narcissistic abuse and, crucially, the potential paths towards healing.
Yeah, it's a heavy topic, but so important. For this exploration, we've pulled together some really valuable resources. We've got an article from Charlie Health that does a great job laying out the effects and the steps for recovery.
Okay.
We'll also look at an overview of different therapies that seem promising for individuals who exhibit narcissistic traits themselves.
Right, seeing both sides.
Exactly. And underpinning it all, we have a detailed explanation of trauma-informed therapy, which is just vital for understanding this whole area.
Perfect. So our mission here is really to pull out the key insights. We want to grasp the lasting impact narcissistic abuse can have and look at the evidence-based ways forward, both for survivors and, well, for those whose behavior is causing the harm.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then. When we say narcissistic abuse, what are we actually talking about?
Fundamentally, it's a form of emotional abuse.
Yeah.
It's carried out by people with narcissistic personality disorder or NPD, or sometimes just significant narcissistic traits. The real defining feature is a profound lack of empathy.
Lack of empathy. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they use manipulative tactics, things like gaslighting, love bombing, really to boost their own ego, their own self-esteem, often because it's quite fragile underneath.
Gaslighting, making you
Ooh.
doubt your own reality, right?
Yeah.
And love bombing is that intense affection at the start.
Exactly. It sweeps you off your feet, but it's really about establishing control quickly. And like you said about gaslighting, it chips away at your perception until you question everything.
And it's not just a one-off bad interaction. The sources stress this is a pattern. I saw the term narcissistic victim syndrome used. What's that about?
Yeah, narcissistic victim syndrome or narcissistic abuse syndrome. It basically describes this collection, this constellation of long-term symptoms that people develop after enduring this kind of abuse over time.
Okay.
The Charlie Health article really breaks down what some of those long-lasting effects look like.
Right. Low self-esteem seems like a really big one. And it makes sense, doesn't it? If you're constantly criticized, belittled,
Hmm.
that's got to erode your self-worth.
Absolutely. It's like this constant drip, drip, drip of negativity that just dismantles your confidence. The abuser's critical voice almost becomes your own internal voice.
Ugh.
Yeah. So victims often end up feeling, fundamentally flawed, always second-guessing themselves. They develop this deep fear of making mistakes, which can really hold them back.
And that must bleed into relationships too. Trusting someone after that kind of betrayal, it seems incredibly hard.
Oh, completely. Trust is shattered. Survivors often struggle massively with setting healthy boundaries later on. And sometimes they can unconsciously fall back into similar unhealthy relationship dynamics. It's almost like replaying a script, even though it's harmful. Difficulty with open communication is also really common.
And then there's the straightforward mental health impact. I mean, it's hardly surprising that this kind of ongoing emotional attack leads to problems down the line.
Not surprising at all. The emotional trauma can absolutely lead to significant long-term mental health issues. We see anxiety disorders, depression, even PTSD quite frequently.
PTSD. Yeah.
Yes. And survivors might also experience intense mood swings, sudden anger, or sometimes the opposite, just feeling numb, like they've shut down emotionally to cope.
Wow. It's also quite sobering that this emotional pain can actually show up physically. The mind-body connection is powerful.
This really is. That chronic stress takes a toll. We see things like sleep problems, persistent headaches, muscle tensions, stomach issues.
Yeah.
These can all be physical manifestations of that emotional burden. And sadly, sometimes people turn to unhealthy ways of coping, like poor diet or substance abuse, which just makes the physical problems worse.
And in really severe situations, it sounds like it can just undermine someone's ability to function day to day.
Yeah, the Charlie Health article points this out clearly. The effects can make it hard to just manage daily tasks, hold down a job, or maintain healthy relationships.
That sounds isolating.
It can be incredibly isolating. It feeds into feelings of inadequacy, anxiety, and can lead to withdrawing socially. And it's important to say, in the most tragic cases, it can contribute to suicidal thoughts.
That's serious.
It is, and it's why resources like the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, just call or text 988, are so vital. If you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out. Help is available.
That's crucial information. Thanks. The article also specifically called out the impact of childhood narcissistic abuse. That feels like a whole other level of devastation.
It really is. When the abuse comes from a parent or caregiver, It's exceptionally damaging because a child is completely vulnerable.
They have nowhere else to turn.
Exactly. The parent holds all the power, and the child needs them for basic survival and safety. This just intensifies the feelings of helplessness
Yeah.
and can create these deeply ingrained patterns of always seeking approval, always needing validation.
And I guess it fundamentally messes with how they learn to connect with people
Yeah.
and understand emotions.
Precisely. It can seriously stunt the development of crucial interpersonal skills like empathy, really understanding others' feelings, or even just basic communication. This makes forming healthy relationships later incredibly difficult,
Hmm.
and it can disrupt their basic attachment style. They might develop anxious, avoidant, or disorganized attachment patterns, leading to ongoing relationship problems in adulthood.
So, given how manipulative this can be, how does someone even start to recognize if this is what they've experienced? It sounds like it could make you really doubt yourself.
That's a really key question. The manipulation, especially gaslighting, is designed to make you doubt your reality. But the Charlie Health article lists some common signs to look for. Constant criticism is a big one, even over small things. Any kind of exploitation, emotional, financial, social manipulation. A real lack of empathy, like they just don't get or don't care about your feelings.
Okay.
Then there's that narcissistic manipulation umbrella term, isolating you from friends or family, constantly pushing your boundaries, always shifting blame so nothing is ever their fault.
Ah, the blame shifting.
Yeah, and creating this emotional roller coaster,
Mhm.
where you feel like you're always walking on eggshells, never sure what mood they'll be in.
It's so vital that they stressed victims aren't responsible. That blame shifting must be so corrosive.
It absolutely is. Narcissists are masters at twisting reality.
Hmm.
Victims often internalize that blame, thinking they somehow caused or deserve the abuse. It's crucial to remember, everyone deserves respect.
Mhm.
The abuse is never the victim's fault.
Okay, so someone recognizes these signs. They understand, this happened to me. What does healing look like? Charlie Health laid out some steps, right?
Yes, they provide a really practical framework.
Yeah.
Step one, and maybe the most important, seek therapy. But specifically, find a qualified mental health professional who really understands trauma and narcissistic abuse dynamics. That's key. Therapy provides that safe container to process everything and learn healthy coping strategies.
You need someone who gets the specifics. Okay, what else?
Setting boundaries. Learning to say no confidently, prioritizing your own needs. This is absolutely fundamental for rebuilding self-esteem and, well, protecting yourself from more harm, especially if contact continues.
Right, reclaiming your space.
Exactly. And practicing self-care. Actively doing things that nourish you, exercise, meditation, nature, hobbies, whatever works. Things that bring you joy and replenish your energy.
And connecting with others seems vital too.
Hugely important. Building a strong support network, people who understand and validate you. Support groups, even online communities for survivors, can be incredibly helpful. They reduce isolation and offer insights into what healthy relationships actually look like.
Mm.
And finally, they talk about forgiving yourself, really letting go of that self-blame and accepting that the abuser is responsible for their actions.
That sounds like a process. It's good resources like Charlie Health's program exist, combining different therapy types. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. What about therapy for the individuals with narcissistic traits? That seems like a tough nut to crack.
It is a very different challenge, you're right.
Yeah.
Our source on this points out the big hurdles, often a major lack of self-awareness and a lot of resistance to seeing their behavior as problematic.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But despite that, there are therapeutic approaches that show some promise. It's not hopeless.
Okay, like what kind of therapies?
Well, there's psychodynamic therapy. This often goes deeper, looking at unconscious patterns, maybe rooted in childhood, to help them develop a more realistic sense of self and others. It tends to be longer term.
Exploring the roots. Okay.
Then you have CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It's pretty versatile.
How does CBT apply here?
It focuses on identifying and challenging those distorted beliefs they hold about themselves and the world, trying to develop healthier coping mechanisms, better emotional regulation.
Contractual skills?
Yeah, things like cognitive restructuring, questioning those negative thoughts, skills training in empathy, communication, sometimes exposure therapy, carefully managed, to face situations that trigger bad behavior and role-playing better responses.
What about DBT, dialectical behavior therapy? I know it's often used for borderline personality disorder.
Right, but its core principles, mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, interpersonal effectiveness can be adapted. These skills can help manage intense emotions without resorting to manipulation and build healthier ways of interacting.
Interesting adaptation. And schema therapy. That sounds like it pulls from different places.
It does. It combines CBT, psychodynamic ideas, attachment theory.
Yeah.
It looks at these deep-seated negative patterns or schemas, often from childhood.
Right.
Therapy involves identifying and changing these schemas. The therapist might use techniques like limited reparenting, providing a more supportive relationship, and empathic confrontation, gently pointing out the impact of their behavior.
There were a couple of others mentioned too. Mentalization-based therapy and transference-focused psychotherapy. They sound quite specialized.
They are. MBT focuses specifically on improving their ability to understand their own and others' mental states, thoughts, feelings. The goal is fostering empathy.
Okay.
And TFP looks closely at the relationship dynamics that play out in therapy, the transference, using that to understand their broader interpersonal problems.
And group therapy, potential benefits, but also pitfalls.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Challenges can include difficulty sharing focus, accepting peer feedback. Narcissistic traits can clash with group dynamics, but if well managed, it can offer different perspectives, a place to practice social skills and reduce isolation. Careful facilitation is key, though.
Seems like there are important things for therapists to keep in mind when working with these individuals.
Definitely. Building trust is huge, often slow work. Patience is essential. The focus often needs to be on concrete behavioral changes, things that actually improve relationships and functioning, not just insight.
Behavior over just understanding.
Often, yes. Also addressing co-occurring issues like addiction or depression is vital. And managing expectations improvement is possible, maybe even significant improvement. But a total cure isn't always realistic. Finding therapists experienced with personality disorders is crucial.
Right. Okay, now let's really focus on the survivors. Therapy for them seems like it would have a very different feel, a different priority.
Completely different focus. For survivors, it's primarily about healing from trauma and rebuilding that sense of self that got so damaged. Safety is paramount.
Safety first.
Absolutely. And that's where trauma-informed therapy often comes in as a foundational approach.
Trauma-informed care. We hear that phrase a lot. What does it really mean in the context of healing from narcissistic abuse?
It's basically an approach that fully recognizes the deep impact trauma. And yes, narcissistic abuse is often deeply traumatic, has on the brain, the body, everything. It shifts the question from what's wrong with you to what happened to you.
That's a powerful shift.
It is. And specific therapies fall under this umbrella. Things like EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing, which helps reprocess traumatic memories so they're less emotionally charged.
Okay.
There's somatic experiencing, focusing on releasing trauma stored physically in the body. And KFCBT, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which blends CBT with trauma-sensitive techniques.
It sounds like standard CBT and DBT can be useful for survivors too, though.
Oh, absolutely. CBT helps challenge those negative thought patterns and beliefs ingrained by the abuse and builds coping skills. DBT skills, especially emotion regulation, distress tolerance, are invaluable for managing the intense feelings that come up in healing and for setting those crucial boundaries.
Right.
Attachment-based therapy can also be really helpful, exploring how the abuse impacted their ability to connect and fostering more secure ways of relating.
And codependency therapy, that seems like it would be particularly relevant here.
Very relevant. Codependent patterns often develop as a way to cope in these relationships, so therapy addresses that directly. Identifying the behaviors, building boundaries, boosting self-esteem and self-reliance, learning to prioritize their own needs. Group therapy and support groups are also huge for survivors. Validation, less isolation, practical advice from people who get it. And psychoeducation, just understanding NPD and the manipulation tactics can be incredibly empowering.
It really does all seem to circle back to rebuilding that core sense of self, doesn't it? Reclaiming who you are.
That's exactly it. Rebuilding self-esteem, rebuilding self-trust, those are central. Specific training on setting and maintaining healthy boundaries is essential to prevent future harm and reclaim agency.
Learning what healthy looks like.
Yes. Understanding what healthy relationships actually involve. Mutual respect, empathy, good communication, equality. Again, finding an experienced therapist is key. Practicing self-compassion is non-negotiable, and the focus is ultimately on empowerment.
This idea of trauma-informed therapy really stands out as critical. Our sources had a detailed breakdown from Stat Pearls. Can we dig into the core principles of that approach a bit more?
Yeah, the Stat Pearls article is really thorough. It defines trauma using both the clinical DSM-5 criteria, exposure to death, serious injury, sexual violence, and the broader SAM-HSA definition, which includes any event experiences harmful with lasting negative
And
effects.
the prevalence.
And
It
the total?
mentioned over 70% of people experience trauma.
Staggering, isn't it? Over 70%, which just highlights why this approach is so necessary, not just in mental health, but everywhere.
Wow, so it's about that shift in perspective again. What happened to you, not what's wrong with you.
Exactly. It's about recognizing and addressing the impact trauma has on someone's entire life. They use the 4 R's to summarize it. Realize the impact of trauma, recognize the signs, respond by integrating trauma knowledge into everything, and resist re-traumatization.
Realize, recognize, respond, resist.
Yeah.
And there are guiding principles behind that.
Yes, 6 core principles. Safety, physical and emotional. Trustworthiness and transparency. Peer support. Valuing lived experience. Collaboration and mutuality. The client is the expert on their life. Empowerment, voice, and choice. And considering cultural, historical, and gender factors.
So it's much more than just specific techniques. It's a whole philosophy of care.
Precisely. It's a framework that informs how care is delivered, though of course specific evidence-based therapies fit within it. Common elements often include education about stress reactions, learning emotion regulation skills, and usually some form of safely processing the traumatic memory.
Right. The article mentions specific ones like exposure therapy, prolonged exposure, TFCBT, and EMDR again, tools for healing.
P-tools, yes.
Yeah.
Exposure therapy involves gradually facing feared things related to the trauma to reduce anxiety habituation. Prolonged exposure, PE, is structured. Education, real-world exposure in vivo, and imaginal exposure, revisiting the memory. TFCBT targets those negative trauma-related beliefs, mistrust, self-blame, and builds coping skills. And EMDR uses bilateral stimulation, like eye movements, to help the brain reprocess traumatic memories across 8 phases.
The EMDR process sounded quite structured. Getting ready, targeting the memory, processing, installing positive beliefs.
It's very structured, designed to help the brain digest the trauma adaptively. And StatPearls highlights how important these therapies are clinically. People with PTSD have higher risks of physical health problems. Meta-analyses show exposure therapy is effective for adult PTSD, and TFCBT is effective for youth, even with complex trauma.
And it's not just the therapist, right? It takes a team approach.
Absolutely. An interprofessional team, nurses, doctors, social workers, therapists, all working together is key for truly trauma-informed care. Creating safety, offering support, collaborating on treatment plans, and crucially, the article stresses considering cultural factors. How trauma is experienced, expressed, and healed can vary significantly based on cultural background. Treatment needs to be sensitive to that.
Okay, so pulling this all together, it's clear narcissistic abuse leaves deep, lasting scars on self-worth, relationships, health, functioning. It's serious stuff.
No doubt about it.
But, and this is the hopeful part, effective, evidence-based help is available, both for survivors needing to heal from that trauma and for individuals with narcissistic traits who want to change.
Yes, that's the crucial takeaway.
And this whole concept of trauma-informed care seems absolutely fundamental. It provides the right lens for understanding and addressing the impact of these experiences.
That sums it up perfectly. I think it's just so important for all of us to see how interconnected everything is. Our emotional state, our relationships, our physical health,
Yeah.
and understanding these dynamics of abuse and trauma, well, it can be really empowering, not just for ourselves, but so we can better support the people around us too.
That's a great point. So maybe a final thought for you listening. Consider that interconnectedness. How does understanding these dynamics maybe shift your perspective on your own experiences or how you might support someone else?
And definitely, if any of this resonated, explore the therapies we talked about, CBT, DBT, EMDR. Look into the resources out there. Support is available.
Absolutely. Healing and growth are possible even after really difficult experiences. Thanks for joining us on this